So before we get started with all the little steps, I just wanted to find what a NEET and a degenerate is. Now, a degenerate is basically someone who is sinful in the eyes of society, someone who's failing. The actual definition means to be a lesser version of your ancestral self. So, it's very relative to what's happening in society. It's very relative to what people consider successful. But that's weird in itself, right? Because you have, people who, back in the day, it was degenerate if you had black friends, when they were still considered, cattle or like this weird subspecies of human. They weren't treated like other people. So yeah, that degenerate, it's usually a bad term, but sometimes people can just be misusing it, which is very common. Now, a NEET is a little more defined. It's not in employment, education, or training. Very simple. It just means you're not growing. You're not doing anything. Generally, these are just people who stay at home. They don't do anything with their lives, and it's just sad. That's all a NEET is. A NEET is sad. A NEET is someone who's basically just waiting to die. They're never, you know them in and out. They're not respected because they're not doing anything. They're like zombies, That's my opinion anyway. So yeah, now that we've defined those terms, we can easily talk about how to avoid becoming one of those. Number one, you have to be really aware, and this is not like a easy task either. Like, you have to be constantly trying to make yourself aware, because as humans, we naturally, we sleepwalk. Like, that's just the truth of it. We're living a life, yes, but are we really living it? You know what I mean? Like, we get songs stuck in our head that we don't want to sing. We don't even want to think about. They're just pounding in our head, and it's like we don't have a choice, because that's what's being taken into us. That's what's programming us to be certain ways and to think about certain things. So I think it's really important that we're aware of what we're taking in, what the people around us are projecting outwards. I think it's super important in that sense. And being aware isn't just being aware of those inner circle things, whether it be friendships, food, whatever. Being aware is also being aware of what's happening in the world. It's like, economic situation, politics, whatever. You have to be aware of these things, because they could affect you in the future, and they probably will affect you in the future. Right now, I don't have healthcare because it's just cheaper. It's just cheaper that way for me. It doesn't affect everyone, but you want to be aware. You want to be aware of what's happening. But that's not an easy task to do, and it's certainly something that takes practice and a real constant idea of what it is to be aware. Also, another side note about understanding what's happening in the world when it comes to being aware is you can't only focus in on what you want to hear. I guess that's an obvious, right? But I think once someone thinks this political party is right, or this political party is right, or whatever, you're a centralist libertarian, you're gonna only look at things through your lens naturally. At least for most of my experiences with people, they're gonna read news sources from places that have the same opinions of them, and it's just not healthy, because you're not gonna understand what everyone else is thinking and why they're thinking that way. So you want to spice it up, and you want to talk with other sources and get other sources for information on this sort of thing. Number two, stable income, or at least a stable plan for income if you're in college. There's a lot of things that people don't admit that cost them a lot of money, and in the long run don't do them any good. I think, for instance, one of them is people are willing to spend, especially younger people, are willing to spend a lot of money when they first get their paychecks on drinking, weed, cigarettes, vape juice. They'll go to a lot of concerts that cost tons of money. Sometimes they'll get hotels for those concerts. Video games, microtransactions in those video games. Clothes too, yeah, that's another one. Nice clothes. If you're buying nice clothes that you don't need, then it's tough, because there's a lot of places you can get good clothes that are cheap. The point of wearing these expensive clothes, if you don't have the money that the expensive clothes kind of project out, it's sort of like a lie in itself, and I think there's no shame in that sort of thing of just wearing cheaper clothes. I mean, whatever. Now, I don't consider someone who's renting a house stable. This is going to sound kind of weird, and some people might disagree with this. But if you're renting, you're at the mercy of your landlord to some degree. And on top of that, you're not keeping your money. The landlord's keeping the money. You're being allowed to stay there under the grace that you're paying him, but even then, that doesn't assure you of anything. And if you wanted to leave, you leave and you break the lease, and that's it. You're not selling your house and getting money for leaving. You know what I mean? But that's important. That's really important, because I think a lot of people would default to renting, but there's a lot of places in the United States where it's still just cheaper to own a house than to rent. It's almost the same in a lot of areas. And there's so many good mortgage programs where you could pay like 2% of the house's value and then be paying whatever you'd be paying in rent to someone. It's crazy. It is a lot to think about. And this is obviously my opinion. From what I've observed, it looks like mortgage rates are going up, and it looks like the housing market's only going up. There's a lot of statistics on this sort of thing that I'm going to put in the description of the video, because I don't want to get into all the specifics, but you really should be aware of these things, because down the line you could be looking at tens of thousands of dollars because you decided to just buy a home early instead of renting. So buy a house, don't get caught up in all these vices, drinking, video games, weed, cigarettes, vape juice, concerts, clothes you don't need. It's just save your money. Save your money, because I promise you the short-term satisfaction cannot compare to what the satisfaction of being rich is like. Your health is who you are. Your health is who you are. If you're not prioritizing your health, what are you prioritizing? You know? And I think that's so true. It's like you can't... How are you supposed to feel good if you're not healthy? You know, this thing, like everything that's released from your brain, your gut, all these things, the serotonin and dopamine, they're reflections of how well your body's functioning most of the time, you know? If you have all this excess fat and your gut's not in good health, I mean, how are you going to think better? Like, your brain's going to work slower, you're going to feel slower. It's just not good. It's never good, and I don't see, there's no valid argument against these things. At least for me personally, I never planned on quitting weed when I was a kid. I was like obsessed with it. But then as time went on, I had these kind of bad experiences where I just began to feel so sick, and it was almost like a bad trip for me. Now, that doesn't happen for everyone, but that was what it was for me. I just couldn't do it anymore. It would just freak me out. And then after I stopped, I got this weird, like, I got such clarity, and like I just felt like all of a sudden like I was like being unclogged. Like my breathing was better. I felt like less like dry all the time. Like it was crazy. It was like I was a different person. And it's funny because I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm gonna quit weed because it's good for me. It was just because I couldn't take it anymore. And it's kind of funny. I've heard that story before from other people. But let me bring up some facts about weed real quick, because these are things that I think people don't know. Just a reminder, any of these things I cite are going to be linked in the description, so no worries. So this is from a live science study. The people in this study who used marijuana were 26% more likely to have had a stroke at some point in their lives than those who did not use marijuana. The people who used marijuana were also 10% more likely to have developed heart failure at some point in their lives compared with people who did not use marijuana. Now, this isn't an exact statistic. This was sampled from 20 million health records of people 18 to 55, so obviously there's a lot of room for differences in there. You know, people because if someone smokes weed, they're probably gonna do other things. Like, that's the thing, is it's like a lifestyle thing. If you smoke weed, you're probably more likely to be open to do other drugs. It's not that weed necessarily caused that, but it's just what it makes sense. If you're not gonna just jump straight into heroin or whatever, you'd probably smoke weed before you did those things. It's definitely questionable, because I mean, you have more carcinogenic chemicals than cigarettes. You have more tar than cigarettes. And there's a lot of research right now that says, oh, it doesn't affect, and then there's a lot of research that says it does affect, and it's because it's being worked on legislatively right now, and because there's these giant industries coming into it, I think it's really hard to actually go over the data of what weed could do for you health-wise. So I think it's kind of a weird area for me right now, but I definitely know that you'll have more money, and you're not going to be inhaling tar or carcinogenic chemicals, which, I mean, that seems like a better thing. So if you can live your life without doing those things, then you're probably going to just be better off if you just don't smoke weed. Alcohol I don't really need to go into alcohol that much. It's kind of like you can drink in moderation, I guess, and be okay-ish, but it's, once again, it's still gross poison at the end of the day that is going to harm your system, even in a small way. Not as much. Your body might be able to handle it, shut it down, but you're still putting that junk into your body. And yeah, I mean, if you want to do that, you want to do that. But if you don't have to, then why would you? There's so many health issues with alcohol. These are just a few of them. But I'm going to link, like I said, I'm going to link all these studies in the description, so you can just check them out there. A side note on the weed thing, I always found it was like, there's also the weird grossness of sharing a bowl or a bong with someone. It's like, when I look back on it, it's just like, ew. There's also a lot of evidence to suggest, more specifically, I guess this affects males, but there's a lot of evidence right now that's to suggest that weed in the short term negatively affects testosterone. And I know that there's someone here who's probably like, oh, Joe Rogan. It's like, well, Joe Rogan's on a testosterone supplement. That's not really like, he's prescribed it by his doctor. I mean, that's not really a fair comparison. Also, the amount of lifting and like crazy shit that Joe Rogan does is it's not comparable to an average person. I don't think the average like 19-year-old smoking pot can be compared to Joe Rogan. That's not, at least in my mind. All right, so general health. You got to really make a point to be healthy in a sense. Like, for one, you can't have a bad sleep cycle. This is the first thing because it's so basic and it feels like this should be the easiest, but it's really not. Like, and for myself included, I sometimes have to take sleeping meds. It's really hard to get on a sleep cycle. I live with 5 other dudes and everyone makes noise. There's light everywhere. There's people constantly laughing, running about, having people over randomly late at night. It's not easy to just get a good sleep cycle. So I think the thing about that usually helps is if you can sneak some naps in, and once you start to force yourself to get up early, it becomes a lot easier after the first couple times to start falling asleep. That's my personal experience with it, but everyone's different, and as long as you're getting the required sleep that you need, I think that's what's really important, and you can mess with it yourself, obviously. Gym routines, things like that. I'm not like a super buff guy. I think for me what's important is just actually getting to the gym, just going to the gym, doing something. Cardio is always pretty decent. I don't push myself super hard, but I want to work up a sweat, work some toxins out of my body. Lifting, Planet Fitness is a really cheap gym that a lot of people have near them. A lot of people make fun of it, but if you're just going there to burn some sweat and to work some muscle groups, it's still pretty good. It's cheap, it's efficient, gets the job done, whatever. But you really want to just make sure that you are pushing yourself and you're not just getting fat and growing complacent. Yeah, as far as diet goes, there's a lot of research that seems to show completely different things for everyone. I mean, right now they're saying cholesterol is good for humans, but before it was bad for humans. I think a lot of the diet stuff you can generally just look at and judge by yourself as how it makes you feel, and just read the nutrients and protein and all these little macro things that are in these supplements and food that you're taking, and really come to it on your own. I've had a lot of experiments with certain, like for instance, like I don't eat corn. Corn has never done me good. I always feel bad. I get like rashes after it. But like same thing with certain meats. But like for instance, like chicken, I could eat like a giant plate of chicken and feel fine afterwards. But it all depends person to person. Different things work for different people. But you have to be conscious of it. You have to make sure you're getting your nutrients. You can't not get these things because you're going to be deficient. You're not going to be working as well. Health is a reflection of who you are. So try your best to be healthy. So this has been kind of fun, honestly. I've been kind of like frantically trying to record this while my roommates are gone. I'd like to go over things more in depth at a different time, but I really just wanted to make this and get this out there of just a big breakdown of what's really helped my life. Positively changed my life for the better, and I don't feel like a kid anymore. I don't feel like I'm trapped in this stigma of not being a part of the adult world, not understanding what's happening, and I think that's a really big step for me. So yeah, thanks for watching.